Welcome back, everybody. Today we're doing a deep dive into the book of Zechariah.
Oh, yeah.
We've got a whole bunch of different analyses and study guides here to help us unpack it.
That's great.
Which is going to be great because there's a lot of different interpretations out there.
It's true. I mean, you'll find scholars debating the meaning of these visions, for centuries.
Right.
But that's part of what makes Zechariah so fascinating, all those layers of meaning.
Exactly. And speaking of layers, let's set the scene a little bit.
Sure.
We've got Zechariah the prophet receiving these super vivid visions from God.
Oh, yeah.
And they're not just random images either.
No.
These visions are full of symbolism.
Absolutely.
They have a lot to say about the relationship between God and Israel, the nature of leadership, and even hint at a coming Messiah.
You know, it's interesting you mentioned the Messiah.
Yeah.
Because the very name Zechariah means Yahweh remembered, which ties directly into this theme of God remembering his promises to his people.
I didn't realize that. So right from the name, we're getting this idea of God's faithfulness,
Exactly.
even when things seem hopeless.
Exactly. And to understand Zacharias' message fully, I think we need to grasp the historical context here.
Okay.
Imagine the aftermath of the Babylonian exile.
Oh, wow, yeah.
The Jewish people have just returned to Jerusalem, and they're starting to rebuild their lives.
Yeah.
Rebuild the temple.
Right.
It's a time of immense hope, but also uncertainty and struggle.
So they're picking up the pieces, trying to make sense of everything that happened.
Absolutely.
And you know where to go from here.
Yeah.
So I can see how Zacharias' message of hope and restoration would have been so powerful for them at that time.
Absolutely. And keep in mind, Zacharias wasn't alone.
Oh, right.
He was a contemporary of the prophet Haggai, who was also urging the people to rebuild the temple.
Right.
But Zacharias' visions, they kind of go beyond that immediate task of reconstruction. They offer a much broader perspective encompassing past, present, and future.
So it's like he's taking this zoomed-out view of history.
Exactly.
Showing how God is working through all of these different events, even the tough ones.
Precisely. And you can see that in the structure of the book itself.
Okay.
It's divided into two distinct parts.
Okay.
Chapters 1 through 8 focus on the present, dealing with the rebuilding efforts and the challenges the people are facing.
So that's the more down-to-earth section.
Yes.
Dealing with practical concerns of the day.
Yes. But then chapters 9 through 14 shift gears.
Right.
They become much more apocalyptic, filled with imagery of a future day of the Lord.
Okay.
A time of judgment and ultimate salvation.
Day of the Lord. That sounds intense.
Yeah.
Already getting chills.
It definitely raises a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And we'll dive into those later, but first, let's explore those fascinating visions that Zacharias receives.
All right, let's do it.
Okay.
Vision number 1. Hit me with it.
Okay, imagine this. Zacharias sees a man on a red horse standing among myrtle trees in a valley.
Okay.
And he's surrounded by other horsemen, and they're reporting back to him about the state of the world.
Sounds pretty epic already.
Yes.
Who's this mysterious fetched on the red horse?
Well, the text calls him the angel of the Lord, which suggests that this might be more than just an angel.
Right.
Some scholars believe this is actually a theophany.
Oh, wow.
A visible manifestation of God himself.
So God's showing up in person.
It does. And what's even more fascinating is that the horsemen report that the land is at peace.
Okay, well, that's good news, right?
Well, it might seem like good news.
Yeah.
But remember, God's anger still burns against the nations for their wickedness.
Right.
So it's like a calm before the storm.
So there's this sense of impending judgment.
Exactly.
Even amidst the peace.
Yes.
It's like God is giving the nations a chance to repent, but they might not take it.
Exactly. And that tension between judgment and mercy is something we'll see throughout the book of Zacharias.
Okay.
But let's move on to vision number 2.
Okay.
This one gets a little strange. Zacharias sees 4 horns.
Horns?
Yeah.
Like on an animal?
Not quite.
What's that all about?
These horns symbolize the powers that have scattered and oppressed the people of Judah.
Okay.
Think of them as representing the Babylonian Empire that destroyed Jerusalem and sent the Jews into exile.
So the horns represent the bad guys.
Yes.
The ones who inflicted so much pain
and
suffering.
Yes.
But they're just horns, right?
Right.
What can they actually do?
Well, that's where the next part of the vision comes in.
Okay.
Zechariah sees 4 craftsmen appear.
Okay.
And their purpose is to break down those horns, to dismantle the powers that have afflicted Judah.
Like a cosmic demolition crew.
Yes.
Who are these craftsmen, though?
They represent God's power at work in the world, breaking down strongholds, bringing justice to those who have been oppressed.
So even though the horns seem powerful and intimidating?
Yes.
They're ultimately no match for God's power.
Exactly.
That's a pretty encouraging message.
It is. And it leads us to vision number 3.
Okay.
Which focuses on the city of Jerusalem. Zechariah sees a man with a measuring line in his hand.
Okay.
And he's going out to measure the city.
So he's like a heavenly surveyor.
You could say that.
Making sure everything's up to code.
But this measurement is more than just a practical matter.
Okay.
It represents God's promise to protect and expand Jerusalem.
Right.
He's essentially saying, this city is under my protection, and it's going to flourish.
So it's not just about rebuilding the physical city.
Right.
It's about God's presence dwelling there.
Exactly.
Making it a place of safety and blessing.
And that brings us to vision number 4.
Okay.
Which takes us right into the heart of the rebuilding effort.
Right.
The temple.
Okay.
Zechariah sees a golden lampstand, or menorah, with 7 lamps, and it's being supplied with oil from 2 olive trees.
Okay, so the menorah is a pretty obvious symbol.
Yes.
Of the temple and God's presence. What about the olive trees?
They represent 2 key figures who are leading the rebuilding effort. Zerubbabel the governor.
Okay.
And Joshua the high priest.
So it's like these 2 leaders are being divinely empowered.
Yes.
To carry out this important task.
Exactly.
Wait, but didn't we hear about Zerubbabel and Joshua before?
Yes.
Weren't they in one of the earlier visions?
You're absolutely right.
Right?
And this recurring image of them being supplied by the olive trees emphasizes the vital role they play in God's plan for restoration.
Like they're the conduits.
Yes.
Channeling God's power and guidance into this rebuilding project.
Precisely. But the next vision number 5, takes a bit of a darker turn.
Uh-oh.
Zechariah sees a flying scroll.
A flying scroll.
Yes.
That sounds like something out of Harry Potter.
It's definitely a striking image.
Okay.
And this scroll contains a curse against anyone who lies or steals. It's a stark reminder that God expects his people to live righteously.
Yeah.
Even as they're rebuilding their lives.
So it's not just about outward appearances or going through the motions.
No.
God cares about the heart.
Exactly.
About genuine integrity.
Yes.
I wonder if this message resonated with those who might have been tempted to cut corners.
That's a great point.
During the rebuilding process.
It's a reminder that true restoration involves not just rebuilding structures, but also rebuilding character, aligning our lives with God's standards.
Okay, so after that serious message about honesty, what comes next?
Vision number 6 is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
Zechariah sees a woman sitting inside a basket.
A woman in a basket.
Yes.
That seems random.
It does, doesn't it?
What's the significance of that?
Well, the woman represents wickedness.
Okay.
And the basket symbolizes a container that holds and confines evil.
So it's like wickedness is being contained.
Exactly. And what happens next is even more fascinating.
Okay.
2 other women with stork wings come and carry the basket away.
Okay.
To the land of Shinar, which was another name for Babylon.
Whoa. So wickedness is being deported.
You got it.
Like God is removing evil from the land.
It's a powerful image of God's judgment.
Yeah. And
his desire to purify his people and their land.
Okay, this whole vision thing is getting pretty intense.
It is, isn't it?
What's next on Zechariah's cosmic highlight reel?
Vision number 7 ups the ante even further.
Okay.
We're talking chariots.
Okay.
And not just any chariots. 4 chariots of war, each pulled by horses of different colors.
Ooh.
Black, white, dappled, and red.
Okay.
They emerge from between 2 mountains of bronze, ready to carry out God's judgments.
Okay, this sounds like something straight out of a movie.
It does.
4 chariots, divine warriors, mountains of bronze.
Yeah.
Where are they going?
That's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Each chariot has a specific destination and purpose. The black horses head north, carrying God's judgment against the proud and oppressive empires that have historically afflicted Israel.
So those empires in the north?
Yes.
The ones that caused so much trouble for the Jewish people? They're about to get a taste of divine justice.
Exactly. The chariot with white horses heads west.
Okay.
Its mission a bit more ambiguous, but possibly hinting at future conflicts.
Gotcha.
The dappled horses head south.
Okay.
Their purpose, similarly shrouded in mystery.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, the chariot with red horses stands ready to scour the earth.
Okay.
Symbolizing the widespread reach of God's judgment.
Okay, that's a lot to process.
It is.
Chariots, horses, divine missions.
Yes.
My head's spinning.
I can imagine.
But one thing's for sure, God is clearly in control.
Yes.
Actively involved in the affairs of nations, setting things right. Now, before we get swept away by all these dramatic visions, let's pause and take a closer look at some of the key players and recurring themes in Zechariah. That'll be part 2 of our deep dive.
I think you'll find this particularly fascinating.
Okay.
We're going to delve into the roles of Zerubbabel and Joshua, unpack the concept of the branch, and explore the powerful theme of God's zeal.
Sounds good.
It's about to get even more insightful, so stay tuned.
All right, so we just journeyed through these incredible visions that Zechariah received to talk about a visual feast. Now, I'm really curious to dig deeper into some of the key figures and themes that keep popping up. Where should we start?
Well, you mentioned Zerubbabel and Joshua earlier.
Yeah.
Their leadership during the rebuilding process is fascinating. It's almost like they represent 2 sides of the same coin, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. You've got Zerubbabel, a descendant of King David, leading the political charge as governor. He's the one overseeing the physical reconstruction of Jerusalem and the temple.
And then you have Joshua the high priest, who's responsible for restoring the spiritual life of the community. He's making sure the rituals and ceremonies are in place, reconnecting the people with God.
But isn't it interesting how their roles seem to intertwine?
Yes.
It's not just a separation of church and state, so to speak.
Yeah.
They're working together, each playing a crucial role in this whole restoration.
And remember that vision where Satan accuses Joshua before the angel of the Lord?
Oh, right, yeah.
It highlights how even those in spiritual leadership face challenges and opposition.
But the fact that the angel of the Lord rebukes Satan and then gives Joshua clean garments suggests that God is ultimately the one who vindicates and empowers his leaders.
Exactly. And what's fascinating is how this connects back to the oil flowing from the olive trees.
Right.
In the vision of the lampstand.
Okay.
That oil, representing the Holy Spirit, is what empowers both Zerubbabel and Joshua to fulfill their roles.
So it's not just about their individual abilities or efforts.
Right.
It's about God working through them, equipping them for the task at hand.
Precisely. And this highlights a key takeaway from the book of Zechariah.
Okay.
The importance of seeking God's guidance and relying on his power, especially when it comes to leadership.
Right, because without that divine empowerment, any attempt at rebuilding or restoring is going to fall short.
Exactly.
But speaking of leadership, there's this other figure that keeps appearing in the prophecies.
Yes.
The branch. Who is this mysterious figure, and why is he so important?
Yes, the branch. This is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
In chapter 6, the branch is presented as a future leader who will come after Joshua and possess a dual role, both priest and king.
A priest-king, that's a powerful combination.
It is.
It's almost like he embodies both the spiritual and political authority needed to lead God's people.
And he's the one who will ultimately build the temple of the Lord.
Okay.
But notice it doesn't specify if this is a physical temple or something more metaphorical.
I see what you're getting at.
Yeah.
It could be hinting at a spiritual rebuilding.
Precisely.
A restoration of the relationship between God and humanity.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And when you consider the historical context, this prophecy takes on even deeper meaning.
Okay.
Remember, the Jewish people were still longing for the restoration of the Davidic dynasty.
Right.
A king who would rule with righteousness and bring about a time of peace and prosperity.
And the branch seems to embody those hopes and expectations.
Yes.
He's presented as a descendant of David.
Yes.
A righteous ruler who will usher in a new era. You know, I can't help but think about how this might connect to the later understanding of the Messiah in Jewish tradition.
You're right to make that connection.
Okay.
Many scholars believe that the branch is a messianic figure.
Interesting.
A forerunner of the one who would ultimately fulfill God's promises to his people.
That's fascinating. So even back in Zechariah's time, these ideas about a coming Messiah were already taking shape.
Exactly.
It's like we're seeing the seeds being planted for this later development in Jewish thought.
Exactly. And it shows how these prophecies have layers of meaning that unfold over time.
Right.
But let's shift gears a bit and talk about another theme that's woven throughout Zechariah's message.
Yeah.
God's zeal. This word comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And it always seems to be connected to both judgment and blessing.
You know, when I first heard about God's zeal, it sounded a bit harsh.
Okay.
Almost like God is angry and vengeful.
I see.
But I'm starting to see a different side of it.
Yeah.
It's more like a passionate commitment.
Yes.
A deep love that motivates God to act on behalf of his people.
That's a great insight. God's zeal is not about blind rage or a desire to punish for the sake of punishing.
Right.
It's rooted in his covenant love for his people
Mm-hmm.
and his desire to see them flourish.
But that love doesn't shy away from confronting sin and injustice, right?
Absolutely. And that's where the judgment aspect comes in.
Okay.
When God sees his people straying from his ways, embracing idolatry or oppressing the vulnerable, his zeal compels him to act sometimes in ways that might seem harsh.
Right, like those chariots of war we saw in one of the visions.
They are.
They're a pretty stark image of God's judgment being poured out on the nations.
They are. But even in those moments of judgment, God's ultimate purpose is redemption and restoration.
Okay.
He's like a refiner's fire, purifying his people and preparing them for a future of righteousness and peace.
Okay, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
It's like God's discipline is never meant to destroy.
No.
But to refine and restore. But there's this one passage in chapter 11, the parable of the shepherds.
Yes.
That seems a bit out of place.
Okay.
It's pretty bleak, honestly. What's that all about?
The parable of the shepherds is a powerful illustration of the consequences of rejecting God's leadership and choosing to follow those who lead astray. It contrasts a good shepherd who cares for his flock with a worthless shepherd who exploits and neglects the sheep.
And the sheep sadly end up following the worthless shepherd.
Yes.
Leading to their own destruction. It's a pretty sobering image, especially when you consider how it might apply to our own lives.
It is. It raises the question, who are we choosing to follow? Are we listening to the voices that lead us towards truth and righteousness? Or are we being swayed by those who offer false promises and lead us down a path of destruction?
Wow, that's a powerful challenge. It's like we're all constantly bombarded with different shepherds, vying for our attention and allegiance.
Exactly.
But Zechariah is reminding us that the choices we make have real consequences, both for ourselves and for those around us.
Exactly. And this ties back to the theme of God's zeal that we were talking about earlier.
Right.
God is passionately committed to his people.
Yes.
And he longs for them to follow his leadership, the leadership that leads to life and flourishing.
But he doesn't force them. Right.
No. Ultimately, the choice is ours.
Right.
And that's what makes the message of Zechariah so relevant for us today.
Yeah.
It's a call to examine our own hearts,
to
discern the voices we're listening to, and to align our lives with the Good Shepherd, the one who truly cares for us and leads us towards a hope-filled future. But speaking of the future, I think it's time we tackled the elephant in the room. The one that's been looming over us since the beginning of this deep dive. The Day of the Lord.
All right, so the Day of the Lord. It's one of those phrases that can evoke a lot of different emotions and images.
Yeah.
What exactly are we talking about here when we say Day of the Lord?
Well, the Day of the Lord is a really significant concept in the Bible. It's often portrayed as a time of judgment, but also a time of salvation. It's this climactic moment in history when God intervenes in a decisive way.
So it's not just about God's wrath and punishment.
No, not at all. It's about God setting things right. Establishing his justice and ultimately bringing about his kingdom.
So in Zechariah, when we see these prophecies about the Day of the Lord, what kind of imagery or events are we talking about?
Well, Zechariah uses some really vivid language to describe this day. He talks about earthquakes and darkness, the sun and moon refusing to shine. There's even this image of a mountain splitting in two.
So we're talking about like a cosmic upheaval.
Exactly. It's not just a localized event. This is a global transformation.
Wow. So what happens to the nations during this Day of the Lord?
Zechariah predicts that many nations will come against Jerusalem.
To attack it?
Yes, but God will defend his city. He'll fight for his people, and ultimately he'll be victorious.
So there's this sense of both judgment against those who oppose God, but also protection for those who are faithful to him.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that Zechariah also talks about the nations being transformed.
Transformed how?
He says that they'll come to Jerusalem to worship the Lord.
Oh, wow. So it's not just about destruction and conquest.
No, in the end, it's about reconciliation and restoration.
All the nations coming together in peace and harmony.
Yes, and Zechariah even mentions a fountain of purification.
A fountain of purification.
Yes, that will cleanse the land and the people.
That's a powerful image of forgiveness and renewal.
It is, isn't it? It speaks to the transformative power of God's grace.
So when we look at these prophecies about the day of the Lord in Zechariah,
Yes.
what kind of message do you think they're conveying to us today?
Well, I think the message is multifaceted. On one hand, it's a call to repentance,
Right.
to turn away from sin and to align our lives with God's will.
Because the day of the Lord is coming and we need to be ready.
Yes, but it's also a message of hope.
Hope.
Yes, it reminds us that even though we live in a broken world, God is ultimately in control. He has a plan for redemption, and he will bring it to pass.
And that plan culminates in this day of the Lord.
Yes, when his kingdom will be fully established and his justice will prevail.
Well, this has been an amazing deep dive.
It really has.
We've covered so much ground in our exploration of Zechariah.
We have.
From the historical context to the symbolism of his visions, the key figures like Zerubbabel, Joshua, and the branch.
Yes.
And these powerful themes of God's faithfulness, his zeal, and the day of the Lord.
And I hope our listeners have found this journey insightful and thought-provoking.
I think they have. It's a reminder that even though these prophecies were written centuries ago, they still speak to us today.
They do.
Offering guidance and hope for our own lives and for the world around us.
Absolutely. So we encourage our listeners to continue exploring Zechariah for themselves.
Yeah. Read it, reflect on it, and see how it might speak to your own heart and your own journey of faith.
And we'll be back soon with another deep dive into a new and fascinating topic.
Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep seeking truth.
Farewell, and may your journey be filled with discovery and wonder.